Turn to the book of Job. Job chapter 5. Job chapter 5. Recall we're studying through the book of Job now, and we're looking at Eliphaz's response to Job. Job had first say, they let him go first. He said, well, I guess I'll go since you guys ain't going to say nothing. So Job stated his case. Now here's Eliphaz, who I assume to be the older because he got to go first. Usually you went by age in those kind of matters. So here's Eliphaz, not our Eliphaz that we know. This is a couple, 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. So, our Eliphaz is down in Elizabeth City, but he didn't write this. He didn't state these questions. This is basically another man, Eliphaz, and what was his name? Town. He was a. He was a Temanite. Temanite. A Temanite. All right. So we're down to verse number 10. Verse number 10. And again, this is Eliphaz speaking here. And then Job will respond in chapter 6. Okay, Job lets him have his say. He's already made a couple of accusations against Job that he's hypocritical and that he sinned. And of course, God verifies in the beginning, Job hasn't sinned. God verifies that and states it twice, and has a conversation with the devil that Job was an upright man, that he was living a righteous life. So most people say, well, his friends here take that assumption, well, if things ain't going good, you sinned. Well, I got news for you. If you live in this world, things ain't going to always go good, are they? Nope. Why? Why is that? Sin. The curse of sin. Where do you think all the diseases and sicknesses and all those things come from? They pooled out of sin. The sin of Adam and Eve. And it hadn't stopped yet, has it? And it's still going on until God burns her up there at the last day when Peter says the elements shall melt with a fervent heat. And this heaven and this earth that we know will be destroyed by fire. And we see that over in Revelation chapter 20, 21. All right? Now, chapter 5 and verse 10 says, who, speaking of God, giveth rain upon the earth and sendeth waters upon the fields, to set up on high those that be low, that those which mourn may be exalted to safety. He disappointeth the devices of the crafty, so that their hands cannot perform their enterprise. All right, now notice it is who Eliphaz gives credit for sending rain. Now, we sang showers of blessing, and what did we get? Rain. That was one of Harold's songs. He believed it, and we sang it, and it rained. And then we had to learn that other song to counteract that heavenly sunlight, to counteract the rain. But here it says, notice he attributes this sovereignty of God over the earth. It says, who giveth rain upon the earth. And not just in part, but all over. There's another verse that says he reigneth on the just and the unjust. Well, why is that? Because there's plants all around us that need water. We need the air to breathe, don't we? And God is making sure that we have oxygen until we don't need it no more. Okay? Until we don't need it no more. Now, you don't need oxygen if you're in the grave, do you? Nope. Your body won't need it. You'll get a new body, and then you won't be dependent upon oxygen, will you? We don't know how that's going to work. We'll have a glorified body, and we'll be able to eat and all that, but we don't know what kind of functions our bodies will be capable of, other than we know that our Lord can appear from one place to another, as he did in the upper room. Remember, the doors were shut. They were hiding out in the upper room, and who stood in the midst of them? Jesus appeared right in the midst. So we'll have a glorified body, but we don't know the process by which that body's going to work. All right, but this says he giveth rain, and this is a free gift. It's a blessing of God. It's one of the ways that God built this earth so that rain would happen. Now remember, in the first early days before Noah and the flood, there was no rain. Remember that? How did God water the earth before the rain came in the flood? Dew. The dew of the earth. And the earth was green and lush. It provided enough water for everything to grow. Remember, Adam tended the garden. There were various trees there that they could eat of. There was one tree they could not eat of, but God provided the water that grew all those things, and it was sustainable for the earth. But now it says that this God has control over all, the godly and the ungodly, the just and the unjust, the rain, and all of sovereign control over this earth, including all the elements, earth, wind, fire, water, all those things God has control over. Well, all we have but to look at Noah. Remember, God told Noah, he said, get in the ark. He shut him in, and there he was floating on the water until the waters receded. I've been watching this. They've had a lot dealing with Noah's Ark here lately, and they've been doing some sample testing of that Mount Ararat where that big boat is, and they're coming back conclusive that it is wood. It was a ship. It did have several levels to it. It did have compartments in it, and they're finding anchor stones and all that stuff, and they believe they found even, I believe, a finger that was, or a hand that was twice as big as our hands. Can you imagine that? But here's the thing. God brought the flood, didn't he? He destroyed the earth. Why? Because their sin was continuous. Their wicked imaginations was constant, and he destroyed. But here now we see the grace of God, the graciousness of God, the benevolence of God, and he sends us rain. The lost benefit from that rain as well as we do, but it's intended to benefit us, and it does. It says, and sendeth water upon the fields. Now that's not just in town, is it? That's out in your gardens. Thank God he sends rain to our gardens so that they may what? Produce the food that we do need. So all these things I want you to say are not under the care of man. The weatherman does not control the weather. Far from it. They get it right maybe not even half the time. But God, I think God does that just to show them you ain't in charge of that. God's in charge. And it's nobody else is in charge of it. Only God can control the weather. Not mankind, but God. So God sends the water, and it's under his providence. He can rain, and he can withhold the rain, can he? He can make it dry. We had a little bit of a drought going here before we finally started getting rain. Then, of course, people would start complaining about the rain, huh? We got to be careful about complaining about the providence of God. Accept the providence of God, and you will be far better off than complaining about the providence of God. Now look at verse 11. He switches to set up on high those that be low, that those which mourn may be exalted to safety. All right? So now look at this. To set up on high those that are low. Now that wouldn't be plants. Who's he talking about? People. But in particular, if he's been talking about the rain, he's talking about husbandmen and gardeners and farmers, those people that till the land, those people that plant the corn and the wheat, those people that grow the vines and plant the fruit trees and all that. It says God gives what they need. So these people in low circumstances enjoyed the blessings of God. It said to set up on high those that be low. Now you think about that, there's a spiritual parallel to that. And what is that? It said the pride goeth before a fall, right? What about the low? What does he say about them? They shall be exalted. The poor shall be exalted. So notice it says they are raised to enjoy good estates and large possessions. God blesses those who love him. You think about how God has taken care of you in times of need, in times of hunger, in times of sickness. God has raised you, kept you, and fed you while you were going through those trials, hadn't he? Is anybody in here starving because you didn't have no food? Should be. God's watching over us. All right? But notice it says, that those which mourn may be exalted to safety. Now, with this idea of gardening and rain, those that mourn are those that would be hungering from drought or from lack of food. You ever seen some of those pictures of the youngins over in Africa that are stricken with hunger? How they look? So they get that gray, blackish color on them, and they don't look healthy at all. Those that mourn may be exalted to safety. And the idea there, the word is used as are black, right? And it's not talking about just the skin color. It's talking about that appearance of having no food. So God raises them up, and they are kept in a fortress, and God will bless them. And then he goes this, look at verse 12, it becomes a little more barbed here. He disappointeth the devices of the crafty. Now, what's he talking about? We're in a farm-related topic here. What do you think he's talking about, the crafty? You ever seen somebody making a profit off of people being hungry? You can go down to the grocery store and see that, can't you? People overcharging because there's a shortage, or overcharging because they can. That's what he's talking about. The crafty have made it to where the poor people can hardly buy their food. We'll see that again in the book of Revelation. You'll see that where those horsemen are riding, there comes a drought, there comes death by famine. You'll see that. How that the rich escape, but the poor, they starve to death. But here we see that they charge and distress the poor so much that they starve to death because they want to make a profit. Now let me ask you, if you're a businessman, how much is enough? They never find enough, can they? It's all about profit. But at some point in time, you should consider that it's not just about profit, it's about helping your fellow man. Now I understand you can't give away all your money. You can give some away, and you can help some by just lowering your prices a little. You can benefit lots of people. Same way with the gas stations. They're in it for the money, aren't they? They're not in it to help people. They're in it for the money. But I got news for you. If you're in it for the money, you're not going to profit. You will suffer for it because you're in it for the money. There will never be enough money made to keep you happy when you're making a profit off the backs of the poor. Think about what it takes to fill a gas tank. Well, it just dropped again there at Hotspot to 366. I said, woo, looky there. Think about that and how that they could lower the price. Obviously, if it's been less than a week since the holiday, right? They could have lowered it and not suffered at all and still be making money. What was it, down to 270 something before all this stuff started again, before the war started? What was it down to? Somewhere around in there, yeah. But it's all speculation for people making money. But their own craftiness will come back on them. They begin to be brutish. They begin to come up with ways to make money off of poor people, like the widows and orphans they take advantage of. That was a big thing. God spelled that out very clearly in the law, that you're not supposed to take advantage of the widows and orphans. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. You're to take care of the widows and orphans. And there was a tradition in the time of Christ when they would say Rabboni and dedicate this property that they were going to inherit, dedicate it to the temple. When they did that, the old folks that were living on the land didn't have nowhere to go. It belonged to the temple. So they were doing that as a tradition to outrule the law of providing for your mother and father and taking care of them. So there's a lot of men that we see that have schemes to afflict those in bondage. And I'll take you back to Egypt. Think about the Pharaoh. What did he come up to afflict those in bondage with? Remember the murder of the firstborn? Or not the firstborn, but the murder of any male-born child. Remember that? That was his scheme at basically committing genocide against the Jews. They would keep the women, that's no problem. But the men folk, they were getting to be too many. So the only way that he could figure to control them was to kill the male-born children. But look how God overcame that by delivering one particular male named Moses, who ultimately, through the power of God, would lead them out of Egypt. So Pharaoh's devices ended up not working. Moses ended up being floated down the Nile River to the princess's bathing spot. It was pulled out. And then there's an interesting twist there, how God turned it around. Moses' mama got to nurse him until he got weaned. So she got paid to do it. So it's interesting how God can take those kind of circumstances for those that are suffering and going through trials and tribulations. God can take and turn that around and make it beneficial to us. Now notice what it says, so that their hands cannot perform their enterprise. Their hands cannot perform their enterprise. In other words, all these best laid plans of making all kinds of money, God stops them in their tracks. Sooner or later you'll find that, like the rich man in the illustration that our Lord gives, he said there was a rich man. He had a successful, bountiful year of crops. He says, I'm going to tear my barn down and build me a bigger one. And then I'm going to take my ease. I'm going to retire. And what did God tell him that night? Thou fool, this night, this very night, thy soul shall be required of thee. So that man was bragging about all that he had done. But who was giving that man those goods, that successful crop? Who was giving him that? He didn't give God any glory, did he? No. But he took the glory, as all on him, and he was going to take his ease. He didn't say anything about giving some to the poor or selling some and helping the poor out. Nothing like that. He's just going to invest in bigger barns to hold more stuff, and then he was going to retire. A lot of people get caught up in that retirement trap too, don't they? All right, now think about this. Remember Joseph and his brothers. Joseph had dreamed a dream, and he had told his mother and father and his brothers that they were going to bow down to him, basically. And they didn't like that, did they? Even Israel didn't like that. But you know what? What ended up happening? God turned their plans around, defeated their brother's plans, and made him number 2 in the land in Egypt. It's amazing how God can turn situations around. You think about the Romans and the Jews. The Jews decided they were going to kill Jesus so that the Romans wouldn't come in and take over their city because of the following of Jesus. Well, that was their excuse, wasn't it? But what had ended up happening just 40 years later? The Romans took over the city anyway, didn't they? And it wasn't because of Jesus. It was because of the priests and all of them. If you've ever read Josephus's Wars, you can read about it, how that there was some missing money. And they believed it was tax money that got missing. So they blamed the Jews, and next thing you know, here comes the army, and they tear down that temple again. So there's lots of plans that men make to whereby they can take advantage of people and destroy people. Look what it says in verse 14. They meet with darkness in the daytime and grope in the noonday as in the night. So what do you think about that? Where's he going with that? They meet with darkness in the daytime. In other words, they lay out the best laid plans, don't they? If you read a couple other verses, it says that they lay upon their beds thinking about mischief. They dream about mischief. They long for mischief. They long to profit from mischief. And because of that, God's going to have them, they're going to make their plans, they're going to lay their traps, they're going to lay their snares, and what's going to happen? They're going to end up in them themselves. They grope in the noonday as in the night. That reminds me of the plague of darkness there on Egypt. Remember that? It was so dark, you could light a torch and still not be able to see more than in front of the torch. That's dark, isn't it? You ever been in one of those dark, dark nights? You ever go up in the woods and just sit in the darkness? Not too many people do anymore. But man, it's dark. There ain't no moon, there ain't no stars, it's just dark, ain't it? It's like being in a cave. And that's what he's saying. It says they're making all these threats. They're doing all this stuff. But really, the light's not in them. They're spiritually blind. And they're in darkness. They're groping in darkness like the noonday. Remember Paul, who was Saul, on the road to Damascus? What happened to him when he got done with his confrontation with Jesus? What happened to his eyesight? He was blinded, wasn't he? Then another interesting thing about that was here was a prophet, had a visit from the Lord, said, go down and visit this one Saul, he prayeth. Yeah, Agabus. Agabus said, wait a minute, Lord, I've heard about this man. He's a dangerous hombre. Sure enough, Saul was praying. So God says, you go down there. Yeah, I've called him. He's mine. You go down there. Agabus went, didn't he? You have to give him that. He had to buckle up his courage and go, because he thought he was doomed for sure. But what happened? Saul was praying, and God sent Agabus, laid hands on him, and then he got his sight back, didn't he? Well, God can defeat the vices, the devices of the wicked. God can bring the light to the dark. God has brought the light to the darkness. Remember over there in John, let me read that to you. John 1. Verse 5 says, and the light shineth in darkness. But look at this sad statement. The darkness comprehended it not. The light was staring them in the face. Isn't that something? It was just like those Egyptians. They couldn't see the light right in front of them. The glory of Christ was revealed to men. He was making a plain statement that he, in fact, was the Messiah by all his deeds. And yet, what did they want to do to him? Kill him. From the very start of his public ministry, they began to attack him, to harass him, and ultimately plotted to kill him. And they tried. They didn't kill him, did they? He defeated their plans. He went to that cross. They didn't kill him. The Jews didn't kill him. The Romans didn't kill him. He surrendered his life that he might die for us. He gave up his life for us. But that light was there. They had opportunity to see the light, and some did. Thank God for that. We know that those 11 men saw the light. One of them didn't. We know that they served Christ. They had a rough time, sure. They had weaknesses, sure. Like Thomas, remember, he didn't have a smooth sail after being told Jesus was alive. He didn't believe it, did he? But guess what? The Lord appeared in the room again, said, "Hey, Thomas, come here. Put your finger in these holes right here. Thrust your hand into this hole in my side and know that it's me." Then Thomas made one of the clearest statements in the Bible. He said, "My Lord and my God." And that's something, what a clear and profound statement that was about Jesus being God himself. My, what a statement. So looking at this, you see Eliphaz is directing this, pointing to the fact that maybe Job has committed some of these iniquities. Job has created devices wherein to take advantage of the poor. Look how rich Job is, or was, and it was all because of ill-gotten gain, is what he's saying. And you plan to rip off the poor, and you've planned to do all this. Job, it's on you because you did all that. But we know that side of the story is not right, is it? False accusations.
Using true statements that God is sovereign, but turn it around into an insinuation.
Right. If God's sovereign, God knows what he's doing. Whether it be good or whether it seems bad to us, it's not bad for us. It's good. It's what Romans 8 says. All things work together for good, right? Well, God makes it work for good for those whom he loves. Thank God for that. All right, we'll stop there. We'll take up with verse number 16 next time. All right, let's all stand. We'll close with the word of prayer.